I'd like to introduce everyone to a panel which will be implementing emerging technologies, AI, machine learning, and graph with data governance and ethics. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce, this is, by the way, being sponsored by both OneTrust and Quantexa. So let me go ahead and introduce our different speakers in today's panel. So I'll start first with Nikita. Dhami. Nikita is a director of data analytics and AI platforms and business solutions with PwC. So welcome, Nikita. Good to have you today on the panel discussion. Next is Stephen Bollinger. He's the Chief Privacy and Data Ethics Officer at National Australian Bank, or NAB. So Stephen, good to have you on the discussion with us today. I'd also like to introduce Martin Macy. Martin is the head of contextual decision intelligence and solutions at Quantexa. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Robinson Rowe, who is the managing director for the APAC and Japan region for OneTrust. So welcome to all of my panelists. And I think, by the way, to get this going, we do want our audience, you've been great, by the way, audience, keep typing those questions in. Every one of them, we will do our best to answer live, and then we will absolutely come back with written responses to all the questions after the event. So either way, we'll be sure to make sure your question does get answered. So I'm going to turn this over to first Martin and then Robinson to set a little context, because, you know, it's a heady thing here. We got some really advanced analytic capabilities, and how do you have that interoperate with some of these core principles on data ethics and responsible AI? So Martin, over to you to set the stage.
Hi there. So thank you for bringing me in here. So companies compete fiercely to gain an edge, and increasingly AI and ML is a large part of that. IDC have done some recent research and the results are eye-opening. They class 5% of analytics adopters as high performing. And this group are seeing real, very significant results. But that's where the good news ends. The vast majority of them believe that real-time automated decisions deliver high business value. But even in this elite group, less than half have achieved it. And 4 times as many companies, that's 20%, aren't seeing any return on huge investments. Overall, only 15% of organizations are making progress with automated decisions. Next slide, please. Basic data issues such as a lack of a data integration architecture, no single version of the truth, and an ad hoc approach to data management is still present in the majority of organizations. But to build real trust in AI, companies need to tackle not just the basic problems, but tougher ones such as data ambiguity or even falsification. Successful AI is inseparable from data. Models are only as good as the data they are trained on, and introduce some new challenges. Traditionally, people have used rules-based approaches, and these have often performed poorly and been fragile. However, those adopting newer AI and machine learning techniques have been met by a lack of trust, and that's often when algorithms can't be explained. Customers can be wary of what automation means for them and the potential for bias, and accountability needs to be clear. These problems are holding back at least 3/4 of companies in their operational adoption of AI. But at the same time, there are promising approaches and technology coming to the fore that address many of these issues. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about them today. Over to you.
Look, we're in the midst of a perfect storm. I'm actually looking forward to this discussion and the panelists that we have here that are living with it. You know, we all know COVID has really forced digitization, right? And so we've got more and more data out there. At the same time, we're seeing a bit of a backlash against that. So this is now the ethics side. So at OneTrust, what we're about is enabling people to be respected and organizations trusted. And it's the yin and the yang of those two things as we go through it. The quoting another IDC report, they actually asked in 4 years ago about trust. And do you trust social media platforms? Do you trust all different sorts of things? Do you trust your own company? They asked those questions again this year in 2021. And across the board, trust kind of went up, except for the question when you say, do you trust your own company? Right? So do you actually trust yourselves and what you're doing in there? So what we're seeing is this explosion of data out there, this fantastic technologies coming along like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and we're actually heading on a bit of a collision course. So I'm looking forward to questions from the audience and some more comments later on where this is all heading. And my last comment. So Mike, when you were going through the great work that EDM Council's putting up there, right? Two things that hit me, right? 50 courses. So this is one discipline we're talking in a organization, data governance, data management, 50 courses. And then we did then there was that map of mapping GDPR to DCAM, and we got all these regulations coming out as across Asia. It's not just India, but Indonesia's bringing one out, Japan's tightening up. It's so complicated how we're going to manage this going forward. And I'll talk more to that coming up.
Good. Hey, Robinson, thank you for context. So let's kick off with our first question. I'm going to stop sharing the screen just so we can get all of us up and visible to our audience. So what opportunities are these emerging technologies bringing? And Nikita, do you want to start with that? Before we dive into the data ethics and responsibility side of it, what can this let us do that was not really there, and how should we all be thinking about that?
Well, when I think about AI and machine learning, and I'm going to park that for a second. I'm going to talk about the complementary technology. Learning, I have to think about mobile phones. They went through their own technology that went through its own cycle of emergence. It was a concept in Bell Labs in the 40s, and there's this now really powerful personal computer in everyone's back pocket. Didn't happen until complementary tech became available, GSM, LTE to start, and now so much more. And really now it's this amazing, bewilderingly versatile thing that enables my workaholism and so much more day to day. And that's precisely what graph technologies, the advent of data management techniques, represent. They're an opportunity to better leverage a concept, AI and machine learning, that's been around for decades. And I think people have been talking about how cloud enables all of this for a long, long time. So I think that's I guess my opening there before I take back to you for any follow-ups there, Martin. But I think ultimately the complementary tech is an opportunity to really leverage something we haven't been able to today.
So Stephen, you have a really important role at NAB. What's your take on these emerging technologies? It looked in your title, you have responsibility for privacy and ethics. So first is, what's that business case? What's making your teams want to do this? What's your take on that?
Yeah, sure. It's similar to what you've heard in earlier presentations today around kind of the value of data, the speed at which we can make decisions, the breadth of decisions that we can make, leveraging AI and machine learning, and some of that is enabling kind of direct commercial opportunities. Some of it is also enabling us to, identify customers who are vulnerable and reach out to them and see if they need assistance. So there's a pretty broad spectrum of potential uses of AI and machine learning for the bank and other financial services companies, certainly. My role is looking after the privacy and data ethics elements of it. So it's really about making sure that when we do that, we're taking into account kind of a broad set of stakeholders that includes our customers, of course, our colleagues, but also broader communities, looking at group-based harms. And so there's an element of not wanting to kind of slow down or inhibit the good things that we want to do with data, but making sure that we do that in a respectful way that's really going to be sustainable long term for us. Because if we make decisions today that people are disappointed by tomorrow, people are going to stop trusting us with their data and as a bank with their money, and that's not a good business proposition for us.
You raised a really interesting thought. We often, when there's panels and dialogues about AI, machine learning, advanced analytics, that normally gravitates to what are the money-making opportunities, cross-product selling, customer 360. But you raised a responsibility item, which is serving and helping the potentially vulnerable customer. And Stephen, is that someone who might have a credit issue, who's overextended? I mean, what do you mean by that word vulnerability? Just to give a sense of some other business cases that maybe not organizations don't often think about, but could be really helpful to your community.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's and so we have leveraged some machine learning to look at those customers who may be in financial distress, where by leveraging AI and ML, you can pick up on connections that just having an army of people looking through transaction logs, or even setting flags to have an individual review someone's account, you couldn't pick up on. But with a broad data set where we can see where people head down a path of financial difficulty, we can start seeing those things early on and start reaching out to customers and say, hey, how are things doing? How are things going? Is there anything that we can do to help? And it's a balance, because there's an element there of you certainly don't want to surprise customers and have them feel put off by that, and that's not the intention. So you have to balance that in the communication and how you use a tool like that.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go over to Martin at this point, which is, hey, nothing happens without two things: a place to start, and number two is a good business case. So these technologies bring value, but it's often a challenge for companies to figure out, where do I start? How do I get this going? And what's the business case? Because if you don't have that, it's hard to get funding and support from your business stakeholders. You've been around several projects. What's your take on that?
So I think a great place to start, and touched on earlier on by you, is with graph. And I'd add to that a related concept, which is context. So graph technology helps bring together siloed data that AI models need, and that's a real problem right now, as we saw earlier. But not all graphs are equal. So context is about building meaningful graphs that reflect the real world. And in terms of the business case, if you can deliver on these, so we've seen for AML detection 95% fewer false positives, and that's while flagging more genuinely suspicious activity. And beyond financial crime, for commercial prospecting, you can see a 90% time reduction and a 50% conversion increase.
Wow.
And it's not just that. So looking beyond business cases, data management platforms themselves that can benefit from context. And I guess there's one second opportunity which is enabled by these, and that's to improve transparency and explainability. And increasing those increases trust. And that actually lowers a key barrier to industrialization and time to value, because trust is what you need for people to feel confident about sending models, sending algorithms live.
So Martin, you've hit a big opportunity and challenge for many companies. The original starting point, often models and the original work in AI was a black box. A few people knew what was inside, quite a few didn't know. And if things went wrong, very hard to really understand what was happening inside of that trained model. Robinson, your business is all about trust. So you have to have a perspective on this one. I'm gonna let you run on this because I think this is an important topic for our audience.
Huge, yeah. So it's very, very interesting, Mike. You know, what's the business case in a lot of these? And, you know, we talked about the regulation. So the kind of business case that got pushed forward was, geez, we must comply with regulation, right? What we're trying to say to organization, and Martin just touched on this, is, hey, if we can improve transparency, if we as a company can be more trusted, then the customers will actually want to deal with us. You know, are you going to have brain surgery with someone you don't trust, right? Versus, you know, how can I trust? And one thing that we need to close the loop on these models, and this is the explainability, the transparency. 2 years ago, when we can travel, I was in Singapore at an AI roundtable of privacy commissioners, right? And the privacy commissioner of New Zealand, John Edwards, said, here's what I want to know. Who do you think I am? Just tell me who you think I am, right? And I'll help correct that or not. And I actually loved that. So I sent John an email saying, hey, can I quote you? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing is it's not just, hey, can we take your data? But it's also, we're starting to see the leading organizations give control back to the consumer on taking that data, on what we call preference management. And so, and then what, I was talking to one of the major publishing companies, global one we all know, and I said, you got to deliver value. You can't just say, can I have your data, please? It's what are you going to do with it? And the examples I give in that space are things like Spotify. I don't have time to listen to songs to work out what I need. You know, Discover Weekly, AI tells me, hey, Rob, you listen to this stuff. You should then go and have a look at these songs, right? So give me value, and I'm happy for you to know what I'm listening to, right? So complete the circle, give me control, give me transparency, and tell me who you think I am.
So, and by the way, Robinson, when we were building the data ethics responsible AI course, we said, you know what, the first thing we should start out is, what is the business case for trust? And that's the first chapter of the course, because the companies that are making that investment are absolutely seeing it measured in the bottom line of the retention of their customers, a more trusted relationship, and it draws people to you. When you treat trust as a second or third issue in your value system, the customer can feel that. And so there's been a couple of organizations that have made that their number one objective, is a go-to-market all around trust. So there's an opportunity, but Stephen, as you've raised, it has to be done rationally and carefully. So Nikita, you're seeing a lot of companies, you know, with your work at PwC, there are obviously some blockers and challenges in pursuing AI, machine learning, graph technologies. What are the top few, and you know, what are the strategies companies can pursue to overcome some of those obstacles?
I think the big one is legacy infrastructure. It's very common, especially in Australia and New Zealand. Legacy infrastructure inhibits you being able to make use of your data, but it also inhibits creating any kind of transparency in the ecosystem. If you don't know, if there's ambiguity about what a system is saying and another system is contradicting it, in your view, well, you can't build the model effectively, you can't bring trust into the ecosystem. Yep. So that legacy baggage that a lot of organizations around here carry is a big blocker. And you see that very clearly. New entrants to the market, the fintechs, are able to innovate far more quickly because they don't have that legacy baggage. The other piece is cultural. So cultural barriers, if I once again take my example of the mobile phones, weren't so much of an issue. Simple, easy to understand device. don't need a whole lot of training. I press a few buttons and it does what I need it to. So easy to understand, I can make use of it. But data analytics, AI are more complicated. It's harder for people to grasp what's happening in the value chain. And you have to, as an organization, make a commitment to uplifting the skills of everyone, not just the data people, not just the analytics people, but everyone in the organization, so they understand what's happening when you are experimenting with AI. They understand the impact of legacy tech, because that will help with your business case when you say, hey, we need to uplift this beast we've got here. So I think if I flip it on its head in terms of what people can do to make it easier, companies that are being successful, they integrate their strategies with the overall business strategy. It's not, here's my data strategy, here's my business strategy, here's how data analytics and AI enables that and makes you get there faster, because the business case writes itself faster as well in that scenario. Take on the larger, more risky AI efforts, but piecemeal, start small, but think big, have it contextual, and align the production of AI with the consumption of AI. Have a clear target as to who's going to use this, who in my business unit is going to benefit from it. How is the customer going to benefit from this? If it's not of benefit to the customer, it shouldn't be on your roadmap. And I guess unify it with the other transformation initiatives, because then you get buy-in from different transformation initiatives a bit more easily. And like I said earlier, investing in technology is massive. The last point I'll make is I haven't met a single person who isn't capable of breaking a process or a piece of tech if they don't like it or understand it. So investing in people so they understand what's happening is massive.
Exactly. When we formed the analytics work group for DCAM, the culture and training was so important as one of the best practices. And if that's not factored, doesn't matter how good the models are or how good your tools are, if the team isn't properly trained or have the right way of thinking about data-based decision-making, it's just you're providing a hammer with no training on what to do with it. So, hey, Stephen, there's been, emerging set of rules and regulations that are coming out. Regulators are wanting to obviously manage this. It's a little bit of an unknown to some degree. What are the, you're in the front line, right, of the emerging trends around regulation. What's coming, and how do companies properly prepare to meet these requirements that are on the horizon?
Well, if you have, I guess the first thing I would call out is if you have any contacts with Europe, even tangentially, you should be reading the proposed AI regulation from the European Commission. That is a pretty shocking document when you go through it. If you consider the level of prescription that is included in it. And I think anyone who's distributing, using, building a component of AI would be touched by it. It's still in draft, so I expect that there's going to be significant changes to that as it goes down the regulatory path. There's no indication that that's going to go away. They've taken a very products liability focused approach to AI. A very heavy safety approach. So my former role, I was with a medical devices company, and in medical devices, the safety group is basically core to the business, because if you don't get approval from your regulator that your product is safe for use, you're out of business. And this very much takes that very strong, heavily regulated approach to AI, and it has quite broad extraterritoriality built into it. So that's why I said anyone who's just tangentially looking the wrong way in Europe's direction, you're going to be caught by this at some point down the road. That's not to say that's the only model that's being considered. We just had the technology report come out from the Australian Human Rights Commission, and that was focused largely on AI. And it took a very different, much more principle-based approach that advocates for the establishment of an AI safety commissioner. But the role of that commissioner would really be to advise other parts of government to ensure that they have the capability to essentially address AI within the context of their existing powers, whether that's privacy or safety or tax or competition or any other established regulation. So it is a much less prescriptive approach that is essentially about, building up that knowledge and empowering existing regulatory functions to address AI, in contrast with the European approach, which is essentially creating a very specific AI-focused regime with entirely out of bounds areas for AI, high risk areas that are kind of the bulk of the concern, I think, for a lot of AI providers or people using AI, just because of the rigor that has to go into their development and use, and then lower risk ones that will have less rigor applied to them. So neither of those are imminent. Nothing's going to happen this year on them, and probably not next year from an enforceability standpoint. But it is certainly setting the direction. And I think some of what you see in Europe is a bit of a reaction to what we've seen with GDPR, in that there is a perception in privacy circles that, to a certain degree, large organizations have been quite capable of dealing with GDPR. And I think there is some perception that some organizations are getting by technically, but not necessarily substantively on GDPR, because it is so principles-based. Flipping that around and making it much more prescriptive is really going to put some pressure on organizations to adhere to it. But it's also quite rigid from a regulatory approach.
Yeah, and indeed, I think, Stephen, the takeaway I'm getting from this is things are beginning to happen once there's the drafting stage, and certainly GDPR has set the tone for many data privacy bills in other countries as sort of a model. So it sounds like all companies should get going with their data ethic programs and not wait. The final form of what will be the regulation by jurisdiction, how it will be enforced, is a few years ahead, but these programs aren't just flip a switch and they're up and running. You have to make investments today. So we have a couple of final questions. We have to wrap up our panel in a moment. I'm going to turn this is a question asked by our audience. It's from Anuj, which is, hey, what are the future of AI emerging technologies in banking and financial services? So I'm going to look to Martin and Robinson. Martin, you want to take that one first? And Robinson, please add on, and then we'll do a quick takeaway from each panelist and move on to our next discussion. So Martin, over to you. Your thought on that?
I'm very sorry, you dropped out just as you were saying that.
Yeah, hopefully I'll come through now, which is it's a question from Anuj, and it was, hello panelists, what do you see as the future of AI emerging technologies in the banking and finance sector? So what's coming on the horizon, just to give the audience a sense of what's new in the works?
Okay, so I mentioned before, and I'll expand on it a little, that I think graph technology is really key as an enabler to AI and ML. It's maturing, it's helping with a range of increasingly important problems, and it's at a tipping point. So there's the great work that EDMC is doing on knowledge graphs that Mike spoke about earlier. One of Gartner's key trends for 2021 is graph relates everything. And they think that it will be used in 80% of data and analytics innovations in 2025. So that's up from 10% today, an enormous increase.
That's a big percent increase.
It's great for bringing together that heterogeneous data. The alternative historically has been curating data into enterprise data models, and that's needed huge effort. It makes lineage, that lineage you need for trust, more difficult. Graph can easily represent the complex relationships that we see in the real world, and but you need to build your graph in the right way. Just loading data from source systems into a graph data is not going to bring you much benefit. How you create the graph and what you do with it is the important thing. So the graph really needs to reflect the real world to provide useful context, and that's challenging because there are many duplicates in data. As Nikita said, source systems disagree about important attributes. And in fact, you may not have the data that you need anywhere in your enterprise. So we see entity resolution as a really key technique for helping with that. It identifies real world entities across data sets that are not otherwise easily joined. It significantly improves on traditional matching, and that's particularly if you have the sparse and dirty data that most enterprises have in the real world. And most real world problems that we see need entity resolution. So it can improve the richness of graphs by bringing in third-party data, such as from corporate registries and the like, and that fills in gaps in internal data. It allows data to be brought together that otherwise couldn't be, but it's not always easy. So coming back to that IDC research, the leading edge analytics adopters, less than 40% of them are currently using significant third-party data, and most of the rest are trying. The final aspect of context is really to create relevant networks of and relationships for any given modeling, any given decision, because everything gets connected to everything. That's not usable. So you need to build around a customer, director, family, a legal entity, or a supplier framework, and that can take complex rules. But if you do that, you can create really high quality features and scores that you can feed into your modeling process and can provide a really serious uplift. Right. So graph technology is powerful, but entities and networks and contextual features and scores are really what takes it to the next level and enables the kinds of business benefits that I was talking about earlier.
Good points, Martin. Robinson, and we're having to wrap up this panel.
So Mike, I'm actually gonna hand to Nikita because I think she's better qualified than me for this area. So Nikita, because she works in that space, go for it.
Nikita, go for it. What's coming?
I'll be quick. I think about data value chains as data to information to knowledge to wisdom. What I think Martin talked about is a very good example of how you enrich and bring out that information level so you can step up into knowledge and wisdom. Where financial institutions need to focus is that data lens. And that's been a key issue in the past when we've had royal commissions and AML concerns occur. It is understanding and knowing where the truth in your data is. The second area, a really vital one, is every bank I know has experimented with AI and machine learning. They are unable to scale it because they forget AI and machine learning creates more data. Feature engineering and how you're storing those features and how you're reusing those features across your ecosystem. So you're not investing a whole bunch of money every time you do another experiment is I think another key aspect of that alongside graph for context.
Awesome. So I want to thank our panelists. We had some additional questions come in. All these will be written responses. So Nikita, thank you. Stephen, thank you. Martin, thank you. Robinson, thank you. just a couple of words from our sponsors for this event. So go ahead, I'll turn it over at this point to just for a few remarks from Martin and then from Robinson, just a little bit about the companies and how people can follow up with you.
So Quantexa is a data and analytics software company, and we look to pioneer meaningful data and trusted decisions through what we call contextual decision intelligence, and that's some of what I've been talking about today. We set a platform which provides a contextual connected view of both internal and external data, and that solves major challenges across financial crime, customer intelligence, credit risk and fraud, all very relevant to financial institutions. And it underpins new data management capabilities using context. Uniquely, what we do is we support multiple use cases on the same platform instance. And that means that we're really the first true enterprise level contextual decision intelligence platform.
Cool.
Platforms. We're founded in 2016, now have over 350 employees and over 35 live implementations across the world, including in some very large organizations. And we're supporting everything from highly automated decisioning based on streaming data, and that runs straight through to complex investigations in regulated environments. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today, and thank you to Mike and the rest of the panel. And if you'd like to learn more, please do email us at info@quantexa.com.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And Robinson, OneTrust.
Very quickly, thank you for this slide, Mike. So we've actually put up this Trust by Design blueprint, and it's, data governance is one area in this space, but we're worrying about all of these spaces. And so what we try to do is help companies actually do this in an integrated way. Next slide, please, Mike. So we have all of these policies. That's the start of the journey. So policies, notices, consent, compliance, data catalog, classification. But we've got to make these living and breathing. So we actually embed all that into the operational processes so that we build out things by design, by default. A comment to the earlier conversation, don't wait for the regulation. If you're waiting for the regulation, you're going to get hit by a tsunami. ESG, we should be doing this because we're ethical companies. We can be trusted. Yep. And that all then automatically builds into the knowledge base, which we can audit and stuff like that. I've put my email address in the chat. My first name is Robinson. So if you search Robinson Rowe on LinkedIn, there's not too many of us. So reach out for LinkedIn or send me an email. And it's been great talking. Love the conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our panelists again. Great discussion. John, back over to you. And thank you again.